After a 2-year political stalemate, Lebanon has a president. The election of Army Chief Joseph Aoun by Parliament is welcomed from Washington to Tehran. He takes the helm of a country ravaged by war and economic crises. What are his immediate challenges? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. You'd be hard-pressed to find many issues that Iran and Israel agree on. But Joseph Aoun's election as Lebanon's president is one warmly greeted by both, as well as across the Middle East. Rare consensus on the world political stage too, with the US, Russia and China all welcoming his appointment. It's ended 2 years of a political stalemate that left the country without a government. For Lebanon, it coincided with an Israeli invasion and attacks across the country, ongoing regional conflict and political instability. Add to that Lebanon's catastrophic economic crisis, and you can understand why this election is being greeted with such hope and optimism. So what are the challenges President Aoun and his country face? And is this really a historic new dawn for Lebanon, as some proclaim? We'll be talking to our guests shortly, but first, this report from Victoria Gatenby.
Supporters of newly elected President Joseph Aoun are hopeful that better days lie ahead. For years, the Lebanese people have endured political and economic crises, and more recently, Israel's devastating offensive against Hezbollah.
For 2 years, we endured the hardship of living without a president, and while we adapted to the situation, the country is now deeply fatigued and in dire need of leadership. The election of General Joseph Aoun is a positive step. He is a dedicated and strong leader.
In Aoun's first speech to Parliament, the commander of the army promised to build a functional state by disarming Hezbollah. Its armed wing has long been stronger than Lebanon's army.
My pledge is to exercise my role as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and Chairman of the Supreme Defense Council, through which I will work to affirm the state's right to monopolize the bearing of arms.
As well as being without a president for 2 years, Lebanon also lacked a functioning cabinet. Hezbollah was largely blamed for the hold-up. The country's complicated political system is based on power sharing between religious sects. The Prime Minister must be Sunni Muslim, the Speaker Shia and the President Christian. Getting a majority vote depends on rival factions creating strategic alliances. In the past, Hezbollah insisted the post of president must go to one of its allies. But Israel's war on Gaza, its offensive in Lebanon and the fall of the Assad regime in neighbouring Syria has weakened the armed group and its allies. Its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, was assassinated in airstrikes in Beirut, along with other top commanders. Aoun's election has been welcomed in Washington and also in the Middle East by allies including Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Qatar. And in a show of the wide spectrum of support Aoun enjoys, both Iran and Israel congratulated him. Lebanon needs international assistance to rebuild what was destroyed during the war. It also needs US support to ensure Israel respects a ceasefire deal agreed in November.
We finally have a president. He's a first-rate guy. I spent time on the phone with him today, about 20 minutes to half an hour, what they have planned. They're also working very hard with the Lebanese military, accountable to the Lebanese people, not Hamas, not Hezbollah, not any other group.
Aoun has pledged to fight corruption and poverty, promote economic reform and invest in the army. After years of chaos and instability, the Lebanese people are relying on him to deliver. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. All three guests are joining us from Beirut. Joseph Bahout is the director of the Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at American University of Beirut. Ronnie Chatah is host of the Beirut Banyan podcast, and Ali Rizk is a political and security affairs analyst. A warm welcome to you all. I'd like to begin with Joseph. One of the first things Joseph Aoun, the new president, has to do is get a prime minister. He's got to appoint a prime minister. That's going to be done with consensus, but that's not going to be an easy task, is it?
I think the task ahead is enormous and the challenges are really huge at many levels. The first one is the conjuncture or the context in which General Aoun has become president, meaning a year of war, a destructive war in the region and in Lebanon the last 4 or 5 months. And this is the first mission that he has. He has to put an end to this war, to complete the ceasefire arrangements in the south, meaning the deployment of the army, also the tackling of the issues of the weapons of Hezbollah that is central to the ceasefire that has been agreed upon and which is a contentious issue in Lebanon for now more than 2-3 decades. And this is a huge challenge. And then there is the political challenge. He has to put the Lebanese house in order, a country that has been in vacuum for now 2 years. But behind that, a country that is collapsed for now 4, 5, or 6 years with a very deeply dysfunctional system and administration. So he has also to put in order things. And last but not least, and it's related to the first point, he also has to patch up and repair Lebanon's relation with the international and regional environment, with the Arab countries, with the Western communities, in a context where the region is still in shambles. We have a Syria that is now in a very sensitive transition. We probably will witness in the months to come problems with Iran and other issues, notwithstanding, of course, the ancient Palestinian question. So he will have to navigate all this very quickly.
When you say the house needs to be in order, you need a house.
Yes, I mean, if you mean that he has to complete the institutional edifice, yes, of course. Next week, he'll probably gonna make the necessary consultations for nominating a prime minister. Now, regardless of this, I think that the speech that he gave yesterday at Parliament after having been elected was very indicative of his priorities. He started by talking about the justice and the judicial reform, which is, I think, the cornerstone of any reconstruction of Lebanon today. For example, let me take one illustration. The country has been without any progress on probably the most important, let's say, collective catastrophe and crime in the country, the port explosion, because the justice in Lebanon, the judicial system have been impeded, largely because of Hezbollah, of course, but also of other clientelistic, let's say, interferences in it.
Let's get into all of that. Let me bring in Ronnie Chatah, who's the host of the Beirut Banyan podcast. There are so many competing agendas here, even just to get to a prime minister and a cabinet. Is this going to take up most of the next 4 months, 5 months? How long will this take?
I think even on a good day, Lebanese governance is inefficient and very slow. And I would speculate that this will be a very slow, delicate process. But that said, it is quite remarkable how much has happened in recent history, and that we're just 6 weeks away, roughly, less than 2 months away from the ceasefire deal that went into effect. And that less than 2 months after that ceasefire, you have a president in Bahout. It's been over 2 years that we haven't had a president in the country. And I'll go a step further. It's just less than 4 months ago that the Secretary General of Hezbollah was killed in battle with Israel, killed in his bunker in the southern suburbs of Beirut. And then you have a president in Bahout. It's quite telling that when security affairs in this country are lessened enough, in that this is not the disarmament of Hezbollah, there's no outright victory by Israel or anything like that. It's not a complete defeat for Hezbollah either. But once you have the security pressure on the country lessened and lightened, you can actually have the beginning of a stepping stone, which is the basic functioning of Lebanese politics, the way it should be. And that said, president is a cornerstone. It's the highest symbolic post in the country. Having it vacant for over 2 years is also quite telling in that these were the two most challenging years where Hezbollah effectively paralyzed not just security, not just foreign policy, but for that matter, local politics as well. You're seeing that group taking a step back in their influence, and you're seeing the Lebanese state take a step forward.
Ali, let me bring you in here. Right now, you've got a situation where finally, after 2 years, there is a president. Is it time for all of Lebanon to come together and quickly show the world that it can get a prime minister, it can get a cabinet, and then it can begin to tackle the problems? Or is the nature of Lebanese politics so labyrinthian that this is going to be incredibly difficult?
No, I don't necessarily share the assessment that General Aoun is going to be in for a near impossible task. It's true that it's going to be a rather difficult task, but let's not forget that Joseph Aoun enjoys the backing of the United States, Saudi Arabia. You yourself mentioned how many players, how many influential players back Joseph Aoun. I think that international backing is going to to play a quite significant role in making Joseph Aoun's job that much easier, and in making the Lebanese state, the new government's job, but that much more easier. So I think that international issue, that international aspect, is very important. And the major player now, which there's no doubt about it, the major playmaker in Lebanon now is the US. It's the traditional ally of the Lebanese army. It wanted Joseph Aoun to come to power. The US remains the major superpower. So if you put all these factors together, I think it's not going to be that difficult of a job. I do have one comment to make, however, about Hezbollah and what was said about Hezbollah paralyzing the process. I think it's also a mistake. Number one, it's a mistake to say that Hezbollah paralyzed the security institutions, etc. There were other factors or other faction involved. Number two, to say that this was an outright loss for Hezbollah, I think that's slightly inaccurate. If you look at the vote which took place yesterday, in the first vote, Hezbollah and the Shia ally, the Amal movement, they voted blank. They didn't give their votes in the first round to Joseph Aoun. After that, they met with Joseph Aoun. Issues were discussed, including the upcoming government formation, granting the Shias in particular cabinet portfolios. Then the Shia duo granted or gave their approval. So this shows that Hezbollah remains a rather significant, at least political player. And ironically, Hezbollah's rival, Samir Jaja, he had to be convinced, and there were pressures put on him immediately before the vote to vote for General Aoun. He was against that vote. So Hezbollah's main rival...
It's a very interesting point, Ali, and I'm going to put it to both of our guests. Joseph, I'm going to come to you first. Hezbollah did flex their muscles in that first vote. They didn't come out with clear support. They knew that this is a way of getting concessions. Now, Ali is suggesting that those concessions were acceptable. Did they get the concessions that they wanted, do you think?
I don't exactly know what happened in the 2 hours where the session was stopped and the pause was given. But let's not get into too many granular details. We all know, and I think that other guests have said it, we all know that things have drastically changed since September, October last year, with the blows that Hezbollah has taken, with the defeat that it has conceded in the south by accepting a ceasefire that is actually more than a ceasefire. I mean, without entering here into details. And Hezbollah had to really be much more flexible in this election, like any other political force. And I agree that Samir Jaja also had to be convinced. But yesterday, Hezbollah went to the session with the knowledge that a president will be elected and that this president will be Joseph Aoun. Now, the rest is optics and theatrical measures and etc. Not giving, voting blank in the first round, yes, was a sign of goodwill. They could have supported a candidate just to play the game. They did this, and then they, quote unquote, sold their goodwill to the president and the new mandate in the second round. But this is all, small details that are really Lebanese petty politics. I think the global picture, we all know. Let's not understate it. The region has really lived an earthquake for the last 6-7 months now, and lately with what happened in Syria, and what will probably come with Iran in the months to come. The region is today a new region. We are at the new eve. Everybody has to adapt to this new eve. The hope, I think, and my hope at least, is that Hezbollah will understand these changes. It will adapt to these changes by getting into politics, by playing the game. It will ease the task of Joseph Aoun. I think that this is part of the contract, and if there was any agreement yesterday between Joseph Aoun and the Shia,
Joseph, I want to pick up on that point with our other guests.
Let me finish just one sentence. The agreement was exactly about that look, let's play the game. Let's stop being spoilers, all of us. We have a country to rebuild. There is a region that is reshuffled, and let's be all positive players. I hope this is the mindset of everyone in the country today.
Well, let's get into that. Ronnie, one of the clues that Joseph Aoun gave in his speech, that he did talk about the idea that all arms need to come to the Lebanese state. That's going to be concerning to Hezbollah, given that they are an armed group and they have been for many decades now. What's the thinking behind that?
Well, I'll answer that question by also addressing just several comments very quickly, that the security liaison official, if you will, of Hezbollah, Wafi Safa, who himself was a target in the recent war between Israel and Hezbollah, his rejection of the Lebanese forces leader, Samir Jaja, even though he never announced his own candidacy, that rejection, or that veto, if you will, using his word, I think says more about where Hezbollah is today and their acceptance of Joseph Aoun that they did not have earlier. In other words, their de facto rejection of Joseph Aoun is over. Whether it's a blank vote or not, I think is secondary. Joseph Aoun is president. And I'll add something here. It's unlikely that you would have seen a president emerge in this country without the Lebanese forces and Hezbollah accepting that kind of consensus. Now, to fast forward to your question, I think it's quite remarkable that in this country, the basics in a speech are now considered profound. And I think it shows you exactly how badly damaged, how paralyzed Lebanese politics has been. You're absolutely right. Joseph Aoun has indicated the de facto urgency of rebuilding Lebanon's sovereignty. He also indicated at a country that would adhere to positive neutrality. Now, this is unusual coming from a president in recent history, and that there's no mentioning of resistance. There's no mentioning of that kind of continuous armed struggle from Lebanon. There's actually local, domestic, concerted effort at rebuilding what has been largely dismantled in recent decades, which is Lebanon's sovereignty. That said, clearly, the presidency, whether it's Joseph Aoun or somebody else, there's going to be severe limits. He doesn't have a magic wand. The Lebanese state is far from ending this long-term nightmare, but it's actually a step for the first time, a step in the right direction, and that Lebanon has been shielded to a degree, vis-a-vis regional events, has been shielded enough to allow this kind of expression to take shape, not from the margins, not from civil society, not from media figures, but from the president himself. It's quite remarkable.
Ali Rizk, I was just speaking to some friends of mine in Lebanon before I came on the show, and they made an interesting point. They say that Hezbollah, because of the events of the war with Israel, because of the ceasefire, has been forced into local pragmatism. It needs to put Lebanon first now. Is that an assessment that you agree with?
I have to say yes. Hezbollah has had to exhibit pragmatism. In fact, before I came on this show, I was speaking with a Hezbollah official who said that we are very pragmatic and we don't want to appear as being the party obstructing the election of a president, meaning that Hezbollah is putting a lot of priority and emphasis on its nationalist credentials, on serving Lebanon, serving the Lebanese state, as I said, showing pragmatism. I would like to make a point about what was said, because a lot has been said thus far about Joseph Aoun's remarks regarding monopolizing the arms, the Lebanese army being the only institution allowed to carry arms. I think that you have to put that within a broader context, because what he also said in that speech yesterday is we want to launch a national defense strategy. So when he talks about monopolizing arms, I don't think that's going to be an immediate process. I believe that's going to be a longer-term process which would address how the resistance, how Hezbollah can be blended into a broader structure. And even according to Hezbollah officials themselves, they admit, we have no problem in the Lebanese army taking up the defense of the country. Should it have the capability to do so, then we're ready to step aside and grant this authority to the Lebanese army. Now, that hence begs a big question. How much leniency will Israel have in the Lebanese army emerging and possessing significant capabilities? I think then you might see a potential collision maybe between what I could term the US project in Lebanon and what Israel wants in Lebanon. The United States wants to build the Lebanese army, wants to make it a capable force. How much is Israel going to tolerate that, bearing in mind that Israel does have a history even in attacking Lebanese army soldiers themselves? So I think that if the United States in particular wants Joseph Aoun to succeed, I think it's going to have to stand to some extent against some of these Israeli wishes. And that's, I think, will be quite a significant test for the upcoming Trump administration.
Joseph, you are very positive about the role of the international community that it's going to take in Lebanon. You talked about this earlier. But is there a danger here that Joseph Aoun becomes the president for the international community and not the president of Lebanon? He's just simply more popular abroad than he is domestically.
Correction, I don't think I have been positive. I have been, let's say, lucid and objective. Joseph Aoun has been elected, I think we all agree here, because of a very high level of pressure from the international community, embodied by, of course, at this time, the US, the Saudi, the Gulfies maybe, and some European countries. But he has also been elected by the context. And the context is an international factor. Yes, the context has elected Joseph Aoun. Without what happened lately, probably the stalemate could have continued. Maybe we could have had another president, but the context has imposed this president, which is an international factor. Now, exactly as you said, and I said it before, now the challenge is to Lebanonize this new mandate. And I think that the fact that, as Ronnie Chatah said, for example, both Hezbollah and the Lebanese forces and others have voted for the same person is a good step in that direction. Now, Joseph Aoun has to own the presidency and Lebanonize it. Lebanonizing it by answering the challenges of the Lebanese, not only the challenges of the Americans or the Israelis or the Iranians or any others. He has to answer the challenges of the Lebanese sovereignty by reconstructing a Lebanese army, protecting the borders, and monopolizing the weapons. And this is not a pejorative statement. In political science, this is the meaning of sovereignty. He has to Lebanonize his mandate by answering the very severe requests of the Lebanese people.
Ronnie, Lebanizing Lebanon, this is what we're talking about right now. The political system has been an international football for a very, very long time. Can this happen? Can Lebanon become a truly sovereign nation in charge of its own affairs?
Maybe not in my lifetime, but I think what has happened is remarkable. It's the closing of a chapter, and that it is hard, in my assessment, it's very hard to see another war between Hezbollah and Israel in Lebanon in my lifetime. It's also very difficult for me to see a sub-state paramilitary force backed by Iran crossing the border into Syria to get involved in Syrian affairs or help sustain a regime that recently exited Damascus. It's impossible for me to see this happening again. So something has changed in that, yes, you're referring to the Lebanonization of Lebanon. I think for the first time in my lifetime, at least, I have not seen a moment that we can all, if we're able to, capture successfully and move on from what effectively tore this country apart decades ago, opening this country to regional war, whether it's in the 70s vis-a-vis the PLO and Israel, whether it's in the 80s vis-a-vis the Israelis and the Syrians. whether it's the long Syrian occupation that we only exited in 2005 after nearly 3 decades, or for that matter, the diminishing or the retreat of Iranian security dominion in the region, but most expressively in Lebanon. It's the first time, I think, in my lifetime, that I can say that there is a chance, a serious chance. The only time that I saw flickers of this in earlier memory is when the Syrian army left Lebanon. But at the end of the day, it is Hezbollah that inherited what Syria left behind. And with the Hezbollah diminished in Lebanese affairs, maybe Lebanon can stand taller than in recent memory, and maybe there's a chance, generations to come, to have a governable country. But I don't think
Let me bring in Ali Rizk here. We are running out of time, but very quickly, Ali, Lebanon needs to become Lebanese again. I mean, that is something that you hear a lot within Lebanon. But how does that happen?
Well, I think that's very difficult to happen. And with all due respect to the colleague who just spoke now, I think it's unfair to focus on what they call or describe as Iranian influence or Iranian intervention via Hezbollah. There are various other regional players who have an outsized role in Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, United States, many other players. So I don't understand this exclusive focus on Iran. But I also disagree with the notion that this is the Lebanization, that now you have a pure Lebanese era. As I was saying in a previous answer, now the US has assumed the role of the major playmaker. Joseph Aoun was brought, he was the US-backed candidate, the US along with Saudi Arabia. It's also well known that the Lebanese army, it is a nationalist institution backed by the majority, that is true, but it's also a traditional US ally and the major recipient of US aid. And so it's going to be under the influence, I think, Lebanon, at least in the near term, under the influence mainly of the United States. Maybe other players are going to continue to play a role, not completely eliminated. As I said, Hezbollah, at least politically, will maintain a role. But I don't see that Lebanon is going to be fully independent, free from outside intervention. No, I think now you have a new era, first and foremost, where the United States is going to be the major player.
A fascinating discussion about a fascinating future for Lebanon. I want to thank all our guests, Joseph Bahout, Ronnie Chatah and Ali Rizk. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the whole team here, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.